Good to see you back. And it is the Hans time that we've all been waiting for. What's fascinating as we start from the end here, King is on e5. The coincidence. If you've been following, you might know what that means. So let's take a look at this game between Hans Niemann and Magnus Carlsen. So they have been playing a lot against each other. But what's sort of exciting, if you ask me, is really the fact that Hans managed to caught Carlsen unawares, or sort of understood what's going to happen. So it's exciting how this game turned out to be, but also I think Carlsen was way too predictable. If we are being very objective, Carlsen usually has a very good way of having these mind games, but this time it backfired on him. Now, famously enough, he played pawn to a3 against Hans and won a game in fine style in the Magnus Tour. And that's sort of the difference there, that it was a rapid game. But it kind of showed the direction Carlsen is going for. Carlsen was going for surprises and trying to avoid theory as much as possible. So in this game, the gamesmanship sort of misfires, as you'll see. Now Hans is on a great run, and this game is pivotal. Whoever wins this is going to be a favorite along this Sinkfield Cup, and also, if Hans wins, he's going to reach the coveted 2700 level, which means he is joining the top elite. So, knight f6, c4, e6, and without further ado, let's continue. So e6, knight c3, bishop b4, g3. And this is typical Carlsen, and that's a mistake, I think, with Carlsen, that he thought that he's being clever, but just became too predictable. He had this idea of somewhere along the lines surprising Hans. And of course, it's difficult to actually catch your opponent in their preparation, especially if they surprise you a lot. But, on the other hand, it was obvious that Carlsen might be looking for some surprises early on. Excuse me. So g3, castles, bishop g2, d5, a3. Very well known variation in top grandmaster circles. In fact, was played by Hikaru himself. Takes dc, and queen a4 was played in this game between Hikaru Nakamura and Perez. Hello, hello, hello. So, thank you for joining in. We are taking a beautiful look at this game between Hans and Carlsen. So, this was sort of the predicted line that many commentators were looking at. Here I'm referring to the Gustafsson and Rustam Kasimdzhanov duo, and of course, the main commentary with Alejandro Peter Svidler and Yasser Serava. So queen a4 is the one that they expected, but instead Carlsen again does another twist with going knight f3. But unbeknownst to Carlsen, Hans actually is in the know and looked at this, preparing for this match. Goes c5, very logical, and that's actually one of those things that you may learn, that there are some basic principles you always want to follow. So takes, you always want to pick up the gauntlet. So d takes c4 is very good. Knight f3, c5. Are you maybe wondering, well, why is black so aggressive early on in the game? Well, truth be told, there is an old adage If your opponent is playing on the sides, go a3 and tries to go for that play. Well, in that case, you want to counter strike in the middle. They're playing on the sides, you strike in the middle, and Hans follows that old adage. But it's a successful one, and it's something that I advise all of you to follow. c5, castles, c takes d4, and earlier on, people were capturing back with the pawn, trying to compensate the lack of a pawn with a relatively big center. But instead, Magnus chose queen takes d4. So Carlsen has been trying to surprise. So this is kind of like the third surprise in this single game, and I think Carlsen just overdid the gamesmanship in this one. So, if you're looking at the game between Carlsen and Nepomniachtchi, Carlsen wasn't really hiding as much and was basing his play more on the quality of the position. So I think he was hoping too much on the surprise value and underestimating Hans's capabilities for this game. Queen takes c4, knight c6, queen takes c4, e5. And you gotta give props for Hans. He's very, very straightforward with his plans. He says, well, you've got the bishop pair, I've got to compensate that somehow, so I'm going to take control over the center. Also, my bishop was pretty bad on c8. Now, you could try to get the bishop out in this position, but it may run into moves such as knight e5 with weaknesses on b7 and potential targets on c4 as well. That knight is sort of oppressing Hans's position. So knight c6 takes e5. He gets the compensation of having a firm grip in the middle of the board, which is of course crucial to compensate. Now at this point, you can't really argue that Carlsen is worse. Obviously, Carlsen is not worse at this moment. Carlsen can still just casually develop, and the situation would still be defendable and probably roughly even. But whenever we talk about Magnus, he's very ambitious. So goes bishop g5, pawn to h6, rook d1, and I wonder if you guys remember what Hans played here, which is of course the key move, but it's a very, very crucial. Yeah, it is bishop to e6. And as on Hans' own admission, he admits he had this one in his preparation. He expected this and felt that, hey, I'm going to get a very, very decent position if I follow this line. So he sort of had a fifth sense of expecting this line from Magnus. So bishop e6, and now things are kind of looking bleak. Because even if you move away, well, I have h takes g5 in that case. That doesn't really work. And if you just move away, we go into this position, well, you lose all the benefits you had. And you're left with quite a bad pawn structure, with white not having much of a control over the center squares. So it is already kind of a slightly better situation for black. It goes rook takes, rook takes, rook takes, bishop takes, g takes, and even though these all seem very logical, and you could sort of claim, well, black's structure is gonna get doubled in this scenario, but with these doubled pawns, it's very hard to get to, and white loses the compensation he had, which was in the form of the bishops. Like, these bishops were very important to put pressure on the position. Takes, and that sort of leads into a position where actually Hans is the one was a little bit better already. Like he is already a bit on the better side. King f1, you do want to do what's expected here, what to do in a position like this. What are we going to do in a position like this? That's so crucial. Get the open files, right? Now, you got an option. You got this file or you got that file. Always have to decide which way you want to go. Now, if you go rook to c8, there's just too many pieces in front, so you really don't have enough firepower to blast through towards the c pawn. So you take the open file and you take the long way home, and and down the line you get closer to the c pawn. So you go step by step, but first, of course, you get the open file, that is correct, Fuchsia, and then you go from there. Now also note, there's a difference between going rook c8 or rook d8. This also restricts that rook on a1. Now Carlsen is denied of activating his own rook. Access denied. King e1, knight a5, again, hitting the iron while it's hot, also using a little bit of tactics to deny this knight d2 square. Access denied. Number 2. Of course, if you capture, then there is knight b3 check, and Hans collects the rook. So rook d1, no trades. And one of those things that I've been sort of pondering on and about while looking at games between Magnus and the top, that not all of his opponents were too ambitious after a while. Not like Hans. This move of rook c8 is a deserving move, a deserving move, saying, well, you get the open file, but you've got a weakness, and the more pieces I have, the more likely I may actually win this game. So what Hans actually has, and is sort of an important trait to have, is the will to win, no matter who he is playing. And if you listen to his interview, which of course is a must listen, he sort of exudes this. He is respecting no one, he respects the chess position, and that sound rings a lot like Bobby Fischer. Unsurprisingly, because on his own admission, Hans is a big Fischer fan. Knight d2, bishop e6, and even if you play Magnus Carlsen, there are basic principles you may want to follow. Here, the c pawn is of course weak, and with more pieces on the board, and with this bishop kind of hitting the wall, because that's very guarded, and it's going to move to b6, white is sort of saddened with this c3 and a3 pawns. Now, there is a weakness on f6, but a weakness that you can't reach is not truly a weakness. c4, and c4 sort of shows a bit of desperation by Magnus, although rook c1 is no much fun either. Black can even go f5 e4 or just bring the king in, with black of course calling the shots. c4 is a very good practical try on another level though. Why? Well, he's saying my knight is so bad, I'd rather give up the pawn on c4 and get active. So takes, knight takes, check, bishop d5. And look at this. Even though Carlsen parted with the pawn, well, there's no target in his position anymore, and this bishop has a newfound one on f7, which could be attacked by the bishop and rook combo, which is of course very, very nice and exciting way of playing, and also the b pawn and the queen side might get under some fire. Now, Hans actually learned a lot from top GMs and, of course, Carlsen himself. Rook to c7. And this is a move that people underestimate. A lot of people would go rook a4, but after rook d7, white gets a ton of pressure, may even get some chances to win the game, because these pieces are very much sidelined. But rook c7 is an exemplary move, over defending the 7th, over defending everything else. Only piece left that is sort of stranded on the sides is the a5 knight, but the a5 knight might just run to c4, go after the a pawn, and then you may actually push these pawns down the road in the future. So it's kind of an important move. It's going El Cemento over here and just snubbing Carlsen's compensation, which of course is going to cause some trouble. Naturally so. So rook a8, a6, rook b8, f5. Again, trying to close off white's counterplay. Rook e8, e4. No more connections. Now, one of the plays that Carlsen could aim for, or could have aimed for, is pawn to f3 and e4. Just cemento again, this bishop on d5, and then sort of paralyzing black's pieces, and it's not that easy to move forward. Of course, black is safe, he's got the extra pawn, but that's not necessarily going to be enough for a win. Rook e8 and e4 is again very good. So Hans is trying to push Carlsen to the max. g4, very good, trying to undermine this. Rook c5, bishop a2, knight c4, a4. Very straightforward play by Hans, and even if the engines don't always agree, it's very good and practical, and tries to restrict Magnus as much as possible. a4, knight d6. Again, bringing a bad knight into a much better square, and this knight is like an octopus, over defending everything and also going after that rook on e8, not to mention that guy on g4. Rook e7 takes, rook d7, e3. So notice how Hans is using tactical ideas to get beautiful outposts and great square control. So this pawn sacrifice, and also a piece sacrifice, because if you take, I check, check, takes, and you're gonna cry while no one's watching. You can't stop that pawn from promoting. But on the other hand, you capture knight to e4, and of course this pawn is taboo yet again because it's mate, and it's basically an artificial back rank mate with the king unable to run and go anywhere. So king f1, rook check, king g2, rook c2. So Hans is actually using tactics and positional understanding, so sort of a universal mix of both to outdo Magnus in this match. Takes, rook takes, check, check again. Now I'm going to pause here for a second. You might be wondering, why is Hans repeating? For one, well, there is a time control, so he's getting closer on the clock. If he reaches 40 and you're on move 38, he is going to get additional 30 minutes, which is a lot in chess circles. Also, it's sort of annoying for Magnus to be put in this spot. And this is sort of psychological, saying, hey, I'm in command, you will have to suffer, and, you know, I'm going to show who's boss, which is not unlike Hans Moki Niemann. Here, king f6, rook d2. Tactics galore. f7, king g6. And not only is Hans up the extra pawn on this side, these pieces are very much tangled up, that bishop and rook. You can't take here because I capture. So Carlsen isn't a must to try to connect all the dots. Knight g5. And absolutely unfortunate for Carlsen, that bishop e4 doesn't even work due to this idea of knight takes e4. And the knight is just in the nick of time to defend the rook, but that's good enough, and it's winning for Magnus's opponent, that is Hans, of course. So king f5 takes, and another check. Here, takes, a5, king e5, again denying all the crucial squares in this position. King g3, knight f1 check, takes, e4, takes, bishop e4, king f4. And kudos for Hans for finding this move of king f4, because it shows that he's going for the cleanest way. So he's not trying to have all the pawns on the board, but enough of the pawns so he's going to win the game. The best counterplay that Carlsen can have is the a pawn. It's very close to promote if he manages to take b7 and a6. But here, actually Hans figures out, well, he's going to be in due time to take the a pawn, and he's going to win on the other side where he's up to have the extra pawns. Here, takes, and just in the nick of time, the knight arrives via the knight f3, knight d5, knight c6 plan. The a5 falls, bishop d5. But also look at this play by Magnus. Even though he is put in the back foot, he's making this task ever so difficult for Hans to actually win. But unfortunately for Magnus, this time there is no escaping. h5, bishop f7, h4, bishop d5, king e5, and this time it is a reverse Zugzwang. Before, of course, the knight couldn't move, and that's why you don't want the knight on the rim. But after king e5, Hans is going to be able to move either on b7 or c6. While if you stay on this diagonal, I've got entry via c4 or b3. After king e5, Carlsen threw in the towel, and he won a beautiful, beautiful game, and quite a crucial one, which I think is quite amazing because this shows that determination and hard work pays off. I really hope all of you enjoyed this one. No, if you enjoyed this, see you subscribe and join us in the future. So take care all, and see you next time.